Hi, everybody. My name is Ariel Whiteley-Knoll. I am the horticulture agent for K-State Research and Extension in Shawnee County. Thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. We're really excited in this difficult and kind of weird time that we were able to put together this webinar series so quickly. And all of that is due to our wonderful Shawnee County Extension Master Gardeners who are excellent teachers in our community. And just because we can't be face-to-face, that's no excuse. They're continuing to be great teachers. So I'm so grateful that you all have joined us today. Before I introduce Carol, I just had a couple housekeeping items. Once Carol begins teaching, if you could go ahead and turn off your cameras and your microphones. Occasionally we get some bandwidth problems. Usually it's worse in the morning, so a lot of our webinars are going to be in the afternoon. If for any reason at any point in time you lose your connection or we lose our connection, obviously if you lose, just try to log back in. If one of us or Carol or I both go down for some reason, just wait here and we'll come back. That has happened to me on a couple Zoom calls, usually when my husband's also working on our Wi-Fi, so he's not here. So we're gonna hope it just works out really, really well this afternoon. And then during Carol's talk, if you'll go ahead and use the chat box, if you're on a desktop computer, that's gonna be at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. My role here today is to be her moderator. So I will be reading those questions, replying to them if I can quickly reply to them, but if it's something that the group needs to discuss, then when Carol's ready to take a break for questions, I'll go ahead and ask those at that time. But then at the end, we'd really like everybody to turn their cameras on or their mics on if you're comfortable with that, and we can just have a really nice discussion about herbs or any other questions you have that Carol and I can answer. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Carol, and then if you all could just turn off your cameras and your microphones. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to be here with my gardening friends, even if it is by Zoom, something new we've all kind of learned. So let's talk a little bit about herbs here and see what we can learn. First thing that comes to mind is just to say, what is an herb? There are many definitions depending upon which resource you might look at. The definition that I find the most useful came from the Culinary Garden, and it is listing herbs as plants that have usefulness, either past or present, for flavoring, medicine, ornament, economic, industrial, or cosmetic purposes. And you might even think of some other ones, but I think just a plant that is useful for something is where we kind of get into herbs. So that's a working definition that we'll use. Another definition that I think is important as master gardeners is that we recognize that some herbs really come to us with a lot of mythology and not a lot of science, because they've been around for so long that there is history but not necessarily science behind them. So when we talk about herbs that we can say are relatively safe for human ingestion or edible herbs, we use the FDA designation of grass, generally recognized as safe status. So this is ones where the FDA has reviewed what literature is available and at least enough common usage that they feel that it is generally safe to use those herbs in reasonable ways. And if they aren't approved as grass status, then probably we should leave them for ornamental use and not try to eat them or use them in ways that might be very unpredictable and even harmful. So lots of lore, some research, but when I talk about herbs, I think we'll stick to primarily the grass herbs, if you will. There are a couple of families that herbs are confined in, and I've listed those up here for you. The onion group, if you will, are chives and garlic chives. I think those are pretty recognizable. They look like onions. Common chives we'll look at as one of our herbs here. Garlic chives have a bit flatter leaf and if anything are more aggressive than common chives in your garden. So having once planted some and then spent years digging them out, I have a great respect for the ease of growth of garlic chives. The chervils, cilantro, dill, fennel, lovage, and parsley are all in another group or family, if you will, and have some interesting characteristics that we'll talk about as we look at some of those herbs. And then we have this big family that is primarily related to mints. Basil, lavender, lemon balm, marjoram, thyme, oregano, rosemary, sage, and savory. Another group that are really considered herbs, but we think of them more as flowers. Did you know you can put some of these in your salads and make them really pretty? Calendula or pot marigolds, carnations. Lavender is good. I have a wonderful recipe for lavender shortbread cookies in case anybody is interested in that. The hardest part about that recipe is picking all those little tiny lavender buds and letting them dry. Nasturtiums, pansies, and violas, those are early in the spring, so you can pick some of those. Rose petals and hips, scented geraniums, squash blossoms, and sweet woodruff are all very edible flowers and can just make a lovely plate. What do you need to grow some herbs? Well, for the most part, herbs aren't terribly picky. They like sunlight about 6 or 8 hours a day. They like general garden soil. A pH of 6.5 to 7 will do for most herbs. Like most plants, they prefer some good drainage. They don't like their feet wet particularly, although some are a little bit more tolerant of moisture than others. They recommend that if you're preparing an area in your garden for an herb bed, to till it good, add a little organic matter, such as peat moss or compost, but don't overdo it. Herbs really don't like excessively fertile soil. If you enrich it too much, you'll get a lot of foliage and not as much flavor. There's something about the plants having to strain just a little bit in their growth that gives it a little more of the aromatic and flavorful components. Watering. Once established, most herbs don't need a lot of extra water unless it's truly dry. Remember, most of our common herbs came from the Mediterranean area where it's kind of a rocky, sandy area. One thing that I would recommend is to not use rain barrel or stored water on your herbs if you're planning to eat them. They're fine for ornamental use, but rain barrel water can certainly be contaminated with some nasty things that it comes off your roof and gathers in the air on its way to the rain barrel, let alone what festers inside that rain barrel. So don't put it on your vegetable garden or your herb bed. Luckily, there aren't many pests that bother herbs. And the ones that do, I think sometimes we find entertaining and why we actually plant the herbs. The swallowtail caterpillars in the dill are certainly desirable, and I think I use dill more for the caterpillars than I ever do in cooking. Occasionally you'll see some aphids, spider mites, grasshoppers if they're heavy in a year, and some rust type infestations. But really, herbs get along pretty well. I think their aromatic oils tend to deter a lot of little bugs as they come along. Herbs make great companion plants. In your garden, you can mix herbs in with flowers and or vegetables. There's some research and certainly some lore that tells us that Mixing herbs in with your vegetables may help with flavor of your veggies and may also help a bit with insect control. We know that planting tomatoes and basil together can enhance flavors. I don't know whether that really is true, or whether we just cook with basil and tomatoes together and we just like those flavors blended together. But I always put some basil plants around my tomatoes. It's a good combination. Carrots and chives are compatible. Summer savory, beans and corn. Rosemary and thyme have some chemicals in them that are felt to deter tomato hornworms, but don't plant your dill next to your tomatoes because the dill may actually attract the hornworms. Marigolds are one area that there is a little bit of research that shows they can suppress the nematodes that can affect tomato plants. However, I think you'd have to have a whole forest of marigolds per tomato plant to really do the trick. But, you know, when we're protecting our tomatoes, any little bit helps. You can use a garlic-based spray to help deter deer and aphids from roses. So, companion plants, mix them up. One of the terms that I've run across more recently in looking at herbs is the term the edible garden, or edible landscaping, or foodscaping. So it is a concept of mixing your edibles into your landscape so that you have food for your table as well as some beauty out in your yard. I think this has come a lot with smaller suburban yards and city areas where there aren't big expanses always for big gardens and ornamentals as well. So learning to mix them up in a pleasing manner. So use smaller areas mixing in with your existing landscape rather than a full-size garden. There are smaller varieties of a lot of vegetables and herbs now. Some of the dwarf smaller tomatoes, for example, blend well with herbs. And then, of course, we can plant herbs and vegetables in pots, and you can put some around herbs in pots and put them in your vegetable garden if you wish, or your patio, and move them around as you wish. So keep in mind the newer terms, edible landscaping or foodscaping. Another good use of herbs, I think, is to help the pollinators. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a quote that really touched me. Pollinators are nearly as important as sunlight, soil, and water to the reproductive success of over 75% of the world's flowering plants. Over 150 food crops in the United States depend on pollinators. So all of those herbs that attract the bees and flowers that can help support that, we're really helping our food sources. Include a mix of flowers and herbs that attract bees and other beneficials in your gardens. Remember to provide some habitat, a little food, water, and shelter. And of course, cautiously use pesticides, because we do know that those pesticides can cause some injury to our pollinators. Habitat can be as simple as some occasional bits of bare ground, fallen branches, putting in some bee nesting blocks, stones or saucers with a bit of water in them. So if you do need to use some pesticides, use the least toxic possible, apply later in the evening when there are fewer pollinators around. And probably the best advice is just be a little willing to accept a few pests in your garden. Anybody know bee balm or monardia? It is part of the mint family. It grows as a native plant in North America, from New York area on west, so it's pretty common. It is recognizable as part of the mint family because of its square-like stems. It has a citrusy-like fragrance. One of the more common stories about bee balm is from the New York area during colonial days, when the English dumped all the tea into the harbor at the Boston Tea Party. The colonists began to use the herb Lonardia, which they called Oswego, and turned it into tea. So Otsego, O-T-S-E-G-O, Indians were native to that area of New York, but for some reason the name got switched to Oswego, O-S-W-E-G-O, so we call it Oswego tea when you brew it from the bee balm plant. So little American history for you there. Echinacea is another very adaptable native plant. We know it as a common name of coneflowers, or its other name is Samson's root. It is native to prairies all the way from Canada to Texas. It was used for a number of reasons by the American Indians. One of the more interesting things I saw using echinacea was it would cause some decreased sensitivity when applied to the feet, the juices, and it allowed Indian peoples to walk on those hot coals. I don't think I'd recommend testing that one. These days we have many beautiful variations and colors of echinacea, as well as sizes from very dwarfs to very large. So they mix very well in with your herb garden as a good pollinator type plant. Well, other than looking at those beautiful things, the other big reason for having herbs really is the cooking. We use herbs to enhance the flavor of foods, add some variety to the taste of common foods, improve visual appeal, gives you an opportunity to be a more creative cook, and my favorite, a healthier diet, less salt. So a healthier you. The recent FDA information tells us that the average American diet has about 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day. If you come to see me as a patient, I will tell you you need less than 2,000 milligrams a day of salt in your diet. So help yourself avoid hypertension and some of the other ailments that too much sodium causes in your diet. Use some herbs to flavor your food. When you change from using a lot of salt in your diet to using more herbs for flavoring, remember that it takes about 6 weeks to readjust those taste buds on your tongue. So when you get to the point where you've used alternative flavorings for about 6 weeks, and then you pick up a potato chip and it burns your tongue, you'll know that you've re-educated your taste buds. Another concept that I really like is that of the kitchen garden, a small area that is easy to reach, maybe close to your back door or patio, or a number of pots that would maybe be outside your kitchen door that you could easily get to when you are cooking. They allow us to eat a diet maybe that's more Mediterranean in nature. The top 10 herbs were polled by the Herb Society of America. Our top 10 choices are basil, thyme, bay leaf, sage, oregano, chives, dill, parsley, rosemary, and lavender. So 10 pots, 10 herbs, and you would be cooking up a fabulous meal. Let's take a look at some of the individual herbs a bit now. Basil. Yum. I have about 50 basil plants under my lights here. And I tried a new variety this year that's looking promising called Emily. So we'll see what Emily turns into. It is a green one. It looks like maybe a little bit smaller leaves than some of the more traditional ones, but we'll see. Common names for basil. There's sweet basil, lemon basil, purple basil. There are maybe 60 different species or more, many cultivars out there with some kind of unique flavors to them. Basil is a very tender annual. You cannot plant your basil outside in April. You need to wait till the end of May because it will not tolerate a frost. Basil likes full sun, fairly rich, moist soil, grows well in most vegetable gardens. If you want the plant to be a little bushier, don't be afraid to pinch off the leaves to promote growth. I usually pinch off the flowers until it gets closer to fall, then let them bloom. We use basil, both leaves and flowers, in dishes such as salads, eggs, pesto. You can add it to cooked dishes during the last few minutes. It gives a wonderful odor and smell, and it can certainly be used as a component of potpourri. A must for pasta sauce. The French called basil the herbe royale. In Italy, it's a sign of love. To put a pot on your balcony is to say you will welcome a suitor. So basil is quite the plant. If you want to plant it outside from seed, wait till the soil is warm, at least 50 degrees. But it's easy to start from seed inside the house. Bay leaf. Bay leaf is another one that I really like. It is an essential herb in the garden, I think. It is a tropical plant, actually. So if you do want to grow it out in your garden, be sure to bring it in during winter time. The common type of bay leaf that we use is the laurel, bay laurel. It is considered a tender perennial. It's originated from the Mediterranean where it grows as a full-size tree. They will grow to 40 to 60 feet. We probably don't want one quite that large in our gardens because we have to haul it into the house. I do have one in my house that has gotten too big to haul outside now. It's about 4 feet tall, and it just lives in a pot upstairs by my treadmill because I can't lug it around anymore, but it is a fun thing to grow. It does not like harsh sun, so if you grow it in Kansas, an area of your garden that has a little bit of shade is a better place to put your bay leaf. Of course, we use the leaves in cooking. They're a bit tough, so put them in your soups or poultry dishes. It blends well with apple and pear dishes. And as you cook it down, before you serve your dish, you'll want to pull those bay leaves out. I missed one once, and hubby wasn't real happy chewing on a bay leaf in his soup. One of the ancient beliefs about bay leaves is that they ward off evil and they protect from thunderstorms and lightning. So maybe this weekend when we have storms again, we need to put a bay leaf into our soup pot. I always know it's spring when the chives start poking up their little green tendrils in the early spring. It's really one of the very first things to come up. You can also grow inside in the winter in a pot if you wish. The common chives are the ones that we see most. I talked a little bit about the garlic chives earlier. They have a flatter leaf. I've never grown Siberian chives. I think they're a stronger flavor yet, as I understand. Chives are very common worldwide, Asia, Europe, North America. They grow in clumps and can self-seed a bit if you don't get your flowers cut off. Weeds, especially grassy weeds, can get in your chives and make it a little hard to control. So I certainly recommend mulching well around your bunches or clumps. Cut back after the flowers fade and you'll get a nice resurgence of growth. So you can get 2 or 3 good growths of chives in Kansas just by cutting them back once they get a bit old. So snip it, use it fresh. Doesn't really preserve well. You can dry them, but it's one of those herbs that I just run out in the morning and grab a handful and chop into eggs or something like that, just fresh out of the garden. So very easy to snip it and use it immediately while you're cooking. That's why you want your kitchen garden not too far from your kitchen. The flowers have a little bit stronger flavor than the greens do, and we typically would add them close to the end of cooking because of that milder flavor. And you can also make chive oils and vinegars for use with cooking. Cilantro, another one of my favorites. When it's first coming up, I sometimes have trouble deciding whether I'm looking at cilantro or parsley. So this is one where you break off a little leaf or two and taste it, and then you are a little more clear on what exactly it is you're seeing out there in the garden. Cilantro, of course, is used for leaves for the most part. If we let it go to seed and use the seeds, then we have coriander. It is considered an annual, but in some places it will self-seed. Its origins are the Mediterranean, but certainly is used a lot in Mexican foods as well. The plants themselves don't live terribly long, so if you want it all summer long, you'd want to plant it about every 3 to 4 weeks to throw some more seeds out so that you get a progression and a good source for yourself. You harvest the leaves when they're about 6 inches high, and of course the seeds once they dry. So many uses of cilantro or coriander. Dill. Oh my goodness, one of our favorites. Even if you don't use it in the kitchen, plant some dill for those beautiful butterflies that come our way. It is, particularly we grow it as an annual. It can sometimes reseed itself. It's been in use in the Eurasia part of the world since ancient times. Do plant it in full sun, and you'll want to put your dill seeds out where you want them to grow, as they just don't transplant very well. And don't plant it with its cousin fennel. If you plant them together, the flavors kind of merge and you get something that isn't pleasant. It's not fennel and it's not dill. It just doesn't taste good. So don't plant those together. We use dill in several ways. We use the leaves, the ferny leaves early in cooking, salads, things like that. And then you can certainly use the dill seeds later for drying and cooking later on. And of course, always grow some for the swallowtail butterflies. Plant one for you and one for the caterpillars. Dill is thought to calm noisy stomachs. And one of the colloquial names for dill seeds is meeting house seeds. Children were given some dill seeds to chew on to help keep church members awake and kids quiet, calming their noisy stomachs during long church services in early years. Brides in Germany and Belgium wore or carried a sprig of dill to promote happiness in marriage. So we all got to have a little dill around our houses. And there's its cousin fennel. It looks a little bit like dill, but the plant is a little sturdier and fronds a little heavier. The one I have pictured here, and my personal favorite, is the bronze fennel. There's also green fennel. It is ornamental by nature, and sometimes you'll see it just for that. It does attract a lot of beneficial insects as well, and it's thought, the oil in fennels are thought to deter aphids and fleas. So there is a term of keep some fennel in your kennel to help cut down on the fleas for your puppy dogs. I don't know that it's accurate. I've never tried that, but there are those that tell me it is useful. It is, there are really two kinds of fennel. There's a vegetable fennel that's grown as a bulb. You sometimes see those in the grocery store. And then the herb fennel that we grow for its foliage primarily. It's a short-lived perennial. It does reseed itself fairly easily. So if you plant a fennel, you'll see other baby fennels coming up here and there that you can move around in your herb garden a bit. So it's a short-lived perennial. They say it's semi-hardy in Kansas, although I've had a patch coming up every year for quite some years. So I think it's fairly hardy in Kansas. You can grow it from seed. You can certainly purchase plants, or a friendly master gardener might share some with you. Remember not to plant it with the dill, bush beans, or tomatoes, as it's felt to influence flavors and growth of those plants. You can use all the plant parts. It's very good with seafood, vegetables, meats, and can be used in making pickles if you want. And it also is a good plant for swallowtail butterflies as well. Garlic. I think this has got to be one of my very most favorite herbs. It's said that you can make garlic use garlic with just about any other food. You certainly can use it fresh. You can roast it 350 degrees, about 15 minutes, and then you can peel it and mash it and use it in all kinds of things. Garlic is one herb that does have some, I guess you would say, medicinal use in some ways, in that it is something that actually does help lower cholesterol. It's not a statin by any means, but it has some of the same precursor chemicals in it that statin drugs do. So if you like the flavor of garlic, you're lowering your cholesterol while you're enjoying your garlic. It's a great herb for cooking. Much has been written about garlic, as it's been around and used since ancient times. It's been thought to protect against evil and to give the user strength. The Egyptian slaves were given garlic when they were building the pyramids, and the Israelites ate garlic before their great escape. There is a group of garlic lovers that have organized in the United States called the Order of the Stinking Rose, and they hold festivals. And I've heard from some friends in California that they even offer garlic ice cream at the Garlic Lovers Festival. I'm not sure I would like garlic ice cream, but I guess you even can use it for anything but a dessert. Garlic originated in Siberia. Typically, we grow it from a clove, and it takes about 9 months to grow some decent garlic. So in Kansas, We plant it in the fall, 3 to 4 inches down in a sunny spot, and then harvest at midsummer when the tops start to bend or turn brown a little bit. Let it dry a few days, hang it in a cool, dark spot, and you can have garlic for months. And if you want, I'll even teach you how to braid garlic so you have some of those cool looking things hanging in your patio. Lavender is a classic herb. We think of it as one of those fragrances from grandma's perfumes and soaps. There are many varieties of lavender, and it is actually a commercial crop because it's used for many different things. There are a number of species and cultivars. It is a perennial, hardy to zones 6 to 8, and some will do fairly well in zone 5. So we do have some lavenders that will survive in Kansas reasonably well. It likes full sun. It's best grown from cuttings, and it does not like real rich soil. You get the best lavender from more sandy, well-drained type of soil. The lavender is harvested as buds just before they open up as a bloom, and they make a great addition to sweet dishes, and generally we use them as dry. They certainly can be used as ornamentals and in the fragrance world, so they have an economic use. The undiluted oil can cause a rash, so when you're picking those little buds, you know, if you're doing a lot of it, you might consider some gloves, although I haven't found a lot of rashy problems with lavender, not more than, or actually less than some others. In the spring, you want to cut your lavender plants back by about 1/3 to keep them full. I notice we do get some more winter kill than that. It may be more like 1/2 of the plant by the time you get the winter kill off of it and get it growing again. Lemon balm. Lemon balm also has a very long history. It's felt to be the balm mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, and it was brought to the New World by colonists from Europe. It is perennial in our area, zones 4 and 5. It grows well in the sun, but can tolerate some shade. You'll want to harvest the plant before it flowers and dry it quickly so that it stays green and doesn't turn so ugly brown. You can use lemon balm in cooking, as tea, salads, potpourris. And one of the best uses for lemon balm, I think, is to let it flower because it attracts honeybees. It may be the first year you grow it, it may look a little scrawny, but believe me, by year 2 or 3, it will be a nice thick plant. Lemon verbena is a herb that you may not be as familiar with. We've planted it for several years in the herb garden, demonstration garden there at the vegetable garden by the train. Lemon verbena is actually a tree as well, or woody shrub, I guess. It'll grow up to 15 feet in a sheltered area. But we can treat it kind of as an annual plant around here, and it'll get 3 or 4 feet high during a season growing here. It's propagated from cuttings, makes a kind of a nice house plant, actually. The lemon verbena has a wonderful lemon smell when you brush its leaves, and it has a nice lemon flavor for making tea or adding to some salads. It's a little stronger lemon flavor in my mind than it is in lemon balm. Mint, everybody's favorite herb. 1 mint, 2 mint, 300 mint. That's what you'll see. It has a wonderful fresh smell. It was thought to help control odors in ancient times and is still used as a flavoring today. There are many varieties of mints, so we can get spearmint, peppermint, chocolate mint, mojito mint. There are just many, many, many kinds of flavored mints that have been cultivated. It's perennial to zone 5. We have no trouble keeping mint growing in Kansas. It also dates from ancient times. It likes sun, but will tolerate some shade. It spreads easily, so cut it back often and don't put it in an area that you don't want it to thrive in, because you'll be fighting it for sure. You can put it in a big clay pot, sink the pot, and that will help control the roots to some extent, but it does have to be a big pot, or it will overtake a small one and just grow right out the hole. So big pot sunk in can control it a bit. You would like to use young leaves and stems. Fresh is best, but you certainly can dry and freeze it. It makes a nice addition to throw a couple of leaves or a small stem into your iced tea in the summer. You can make jelly, sauces, mint sauces if you wish, and it certainly works well for an ornamental or companion plant, and it likely does repel some pests as it has a pretty good odor. Oregano is another very commonly used mint, mint family plant. It's adaptable and used in Italian, Greek, and Mexican cuisines. It was brought to the U.S. from the Mediterranean area. There are many varieties of oregano as well. One variety that I really like to use is the marjoram or sweet marjoram. It's a little lighter flavor than typical oregano, not nearly as overwhelming. It is an annual in many places, but we can get oregano to winter over in Kansas, especially if it's a fairly protected area. I have several varieties growing in my herb garden that have been there for some years, so it does grow fairly well. It likes sunny, well-drained areas. It'll tolerate the heat pretty well. My best advice is cut it frequently because it will grow fast. It's described as a hot, peppery flavor, does well with tomato, egg, and vegetable dishes, meats, herb blends, and Italian, Greek, and Latin dishes. Parsley. Parsley is up in the herb gardens already. It is a fairly early one coming up. You can start snipping the leaves when it's about 6 inches tall. It is reproduced best by plant divisions. Seeds do not always come true to flavor, so best to start it from a little plant. There are 2 common kinds of parsley, the flat leaf or Italian parsley and the curly leaf. Curly leaf was what I always remember is a garnish on plates in the restaurant when I was a kid. I knew I was someplace fancy if they had parsley on the plate. I don't much think of the flavor of the curly leaf, but I do like the flavor of the flat leaf. I think it's much more useful in cooking. It's a biennial plant that we treat as an annual. It likes sun, fairly moist soil, well-drained soil, and it will do well in windowsill planters during the winter. Cut from the outside and it will keep the plant going as it sends stems out from the inside. It's a gentle flavor and it works well as a mixed herb in cooking. Rosemary, another one of my favorite herbs. This is, remember, not just a decoration as well. It makes a very happy plant in the dead of winter to keep one by your kitchen sink or kitchen window and brush your hands across it and just give you a nice, nice herby smell. It is actually an evergreen shrub. Again, many varieties. It's a tender perennial. They say it'll tolerate to 10 degrees. That's not been my experience. I have very poor luck in carrying rosemary over in Kansas. I just buy a new one every year or two and replant them. They do like a sandy soil, so cactus soil works pretty good if you're putting it in a pot to have in the house. Harvest about 4-inch stem pieces at a time. Don't cut your plant back more than about 20% at any one time, and it will continue to come back. They make nice kebabs, if you will. You use a heavier stem, and you can stick your tomatoes and mushrooms and things on it over the grill, and it makes a very nice, kebab. Rosemary is thought to keep your home smelling sweet and has many myths and legends about remembrance, friendship, love, and in some parts of the world it's used in wedding bouquets and funeral bouquets. Sage is a nice ornamental plant as well as an herb. Its fuzzy leaves have a beautiful texture to them. The Salvia officinalis is the most common sage that we use. There's a Bragdon sage that has a thicker leaf, but typically it's the Salvia variety that we use most commonly. The common types that we see grown for herbs are the golden, purple, and tricolor sages. It's a hardy perennial that will last, it says 4 to 5 years on the slide. I think about 3 years is a good growth if you can keep it going that long. It originates in Spain, France, and the Mediterranean areas. It does well if you prune it fairly severely in the spring, and it will come back not nearly so woody that way. Snip the leaves to use it. Their sage is very helpful in salads, eggs, beef, pork, vegetables. Is the best flavor, I think, comes from the fresh. The dry is a much stronger. It has less of the lemony components to it. When I was a kid, the only thing I knew about sage was my grandmother's dressing that she put into the turkey stuffing, and it was a little strong. So it took me a while to learn to like sage again, that it was a fresh sage has a really different flavor than that dry old stuff that Grandma used. Another one of my favorite herbs is tarragon. And the type of tarragon that I'd recommend is French tarragon. French tarragon will numb your tongue when you chew on it. We have some in the vegetable garden. You might stop by there and try a little sample when we can once again get into our garden. And it will cause a little numbing on your tongue. Russian tarragon does not really do that. It doesn't have the same flavor. So be a little picky when you go to purchase your tarragon plants. Pass by the Russian tarragon. It's just not anywhere nearly as good as French tarragon is in flavor. Tarragon is a hardy perennial, and we can grow it here in Kansas. It likes fairly rich, well-drained soil. You can freeze it, drying to some extent. can be done if you use a dehydrator. It's very useful in dishes, chicken, eggs, vinegar, sauces. French cooking uses a lot of tarragon, hence French tarragon. It's used in herb blends and vinegars as well. Thyme is a very common, one thing I was going to mention on the tarragon, some areas it may just be too hot to grow your tarragon well. So if you have an area that's maybe not quite as full of direct sun, you might want to put your tarragon there. There is an alternative called Mexican tarragon. It's a member of the marigold family, but the flavor is a little bit similar to French tarragon, a little bit stronger, but it's often used as a substitute, especially in the South where French tarragon will not grow. Okay, back to thyme. Many varieties. Thyme grows from the little tiny rock plants up to common thyme that may be as big as 15 inches tall. It can have pink, white, lavender, or red flowers, and it blends very well with other herbs. Bees love thyme, so be sure and have some in your garden. The Grassroots Herb Society newsletter says if you don't know what herb to put in your cooking, use thyme. It blends well with just about everything. A good summary of herbs can be found in our Kansas Garden Guide. There is one for annuals as well as perennials, and it will tell you the herb, its general size and description, how it likes to grow, how to harvest it, and its common uses. So this slide clearly is not very user-friendly when it comes to reading because there's a lot of information on it, but check out your Kansas Garden Guide. It's a great reference and will help you as well. And I think Ariel has that listed on the website. When you're ready to harvest your herbs, some key points would be to pick your leaves early in the morning after the dew dries. The essential oils will be at their most intense at that time. Use an open basket or container to let the air flow around them, and just pretty much cut what you're going to use. The annual types to a few inches, and perennials maybe from 25 to certainly no more than half of their height. Wash them well with cool water and then lay them out or pat them to dry. A spinner can help with larger amounts of herbs if you're going to do some preserving. You can also put the stems in some water and save them for a couple of days maybe, but it's really best, if at all possible, to pick your herbs as you're ready to use them. Herbs can be preserved from a number of different ways depending on the type of herb. Air drying can be done where you tie and hang them. It needs a warm, dark place, gentle air circulation. Some of my references call for a dark closet. I don't know about you, but I don't have spare closets in my house. And I put them up on my garden table and things like that, but the sun is really pretty strong and I don't have the best luck air drying them. Some people have a basement they can do that in. I think it just kind of depends on what location you might find useful. I've had the best luck using a dehydrator, and a commercial dehydrator, not a commercial one, but a home use one, can allow you to use some pretty low temperatures. You'll dry things for maybe 12 to 36 hours on some things, and it speeds up the process than letting them just hang somewhere, plus you get a more controlled setting. Oven drying is not really recommended because most ovens don't go down low enough in temperature to dry them. If yours does, then if you want to tie your oven up in the summer for 100 degrees for 12 hours, you can do that. But personally, I put it on the dehydrator and throw it in the basement. It is easy enough to use. Microwaving, although there are some directions out there, is not recommended. It just cooks the oils. It doesn't really save them for flavoring very well. You should store your herbs dry when crumbly, not leathery, and they'll stay useful for a good 6 to 12 months if fully dry. Store them in an airtight container and out of direct light and heat. Freezing is another great way. Mince them up, put them in ice cube trays, and freeze them. Bag them up, and freeze them. And then you can just unthaw them or just put ice cube and all into soups and stews. An oil paste is another way of preserving flavor, or you can chop up your herbs, add some oil, and then freeze it in the ice cube trays or small containers and then bag them up. Using fresh herbs, really, it's up to you. There aren't any set rules. The taste has to work for you. Pick what you plan to use if possible, because the flavor will diminish if stored for more than a few days. Tender herbs are used best near the end of cooking to retain their flavors, like basil, chives, dill, fennel, parsley. Woody herbs are put in earlier to allow the flavors to bend, so bay leaves, oregano, sage, thyme, rosemary. Thick herbs should be minced very fine or left whole. I really recommend leaving them whole and then just pulling them out, because they really are kind of nasty on the tongue if they're really stiff. General fresh to dry ratio, about a tablespoon of fresh chopped herbs is equal to a teaspoon of crumbled dry or a 4th teaspoon of the ground dry. Here's an example of a classic pesto recipe. Things are certainly readily available for you in a variety of places. I always laugh where it says bruise first and then put it in your food processor. It seems kind of silly, doesn't it? But any variety of basil, you'll get a slightly different flavor depending on the type of basil you use. Parsley, I think, is optional. It changes the flavor, so if you like parsley a lot, put it in. If you don't, leave it out. Garlic, more or less, depending on your taste for garlic. And then nuts. Pine nuts are probably the traditional way, but walnuts work really quite well, and there really isn't a great deal of difference in the flavor between pine nuts and walnuts. The price, however, is considerably different. Pine nuts cost a lot more than walnuts. You can add salt and pepper if you wish, and then a good quality olive oil and a good quality cheese. A Parmesan or a blended cheese works well. Again, experiment. Come up with something that you like and works well for you and your family. Another option for using your herbs might be herb butters, where you mix the finely cut herbs in with some butter, a little bit of lemon juice. You can use it for about a week if you keep it in the fridge, but you certainly can freeze it. It makes a great cooking for meats to get a little of that butter out, and herb the butter in your pan or add to breads. Can be a good dipping sauce, things like that. Add to your vegetables. Vinegars and oils, another way of preserving. Chive flowers and white wine or white vinegar works really great, as well as lemon balm. Tarragon and red wine vinegar is just to die for. Really is good on a salad. You can add in dill, fennel, garlic, or basil, ginger, chive blossom, savory, red vinegar, white wine vinegar, rice wine vinegar if you want something a little lighter. The typical French vinegar, Provençal vinegar, is thyme, rosemary, bay leaf, garlic, orange peel in a white wine vinegar. So you can be quite the gourmet with your vinegars if you wish. Let the vinegar steep for, a day or two, and then strain them if you wish, and they'll keep quite a long time. If you want to mix them in oils, best to keep it refrigerated and then use it in a couple of weeks. It won't last as long. Here's an example of some of the classic blends, the Herbes de Provence 1 and 2. And if you don't really know what you want to use for herbs, you can purchase one of these and give it a try. They're readily available, and kind of come up then with your own blend based on what you're growing and what you like. So in summary here, starting your herb garden near your kitchen or a windowsill works great. You may want to do a soil test just to make sure you've got a good spot. Choose your plants, reputable sellers. Local plants really do better because they're acclimated to our area. Something you can get from a fellow master gardener is probably shown the test of time. Growing assistance through K-State Research and Extension. And then, of course, if you have a problem, don't forget about the Master Gardener Response Line. We have some great demonstration garden in our area, the Master Gardener Vegetable Garden at the Expo, and then the Ward Mead Botanical Gardens at Old Prairie Town also has a nice herb garden. Here's my little herb garden, kind of blending in with the flowers, and you see the edge of the vegetable box there. So not a huge area, but I've got a number of different herbs growing there, mulched, and a little walkway so I can get to things. In the shadow there towards the right side, you don't see the fennel, but it's about fence tall. It's quite the good sized fennel plant. Here's Ward Mead. It's one of the areas I volunteer in as well, and we've expanded that garden since 2017, so it's about a third again as large now. And if I'm ever able to get there this year and work, we'll see what shape it's in. Hard not to be in the gardens this time of year, but it's open to the public. Wander by and smell. Lots of good experiences there in the garden. Here's some references for you. Rodell's Illustrated Encyclopedia is a great reference, very useful, and covers many, many different herbs. Herb Society, and I think there's a newer edition now than 2007, but it's the big encyclopedia, and it's hefty, and lots of information in that one. So enjoy growing your herbs. And Ariel, if you've got some questions, I'd be happy to see if I can answer them.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Carol. That was wonderful. I learned a lot because I actually haven't heard you give this presentation before.
Oh, yeah.
So it was very fun. We've been having a lot of good discussion in the chat box. I think I've been able to answer everybody's questions as we go along. Some questions just about everything as you were going along. You can tell everybody's been really engaged because they're asking everything. But if any of you want to turn your mics and your cameras back on, you're welcome to ask Carol some of your questions now that we're all done. Hopefully we can have some good herb discussion. Anybody brave enough?
Carol, I have a question.
Hi, Leslie.
Hey, do you have any recommendations between the two different types of chamomile, the German or the Roman?
Oh, that is a great question. And let me pull my little Rodell's out here because I always get those confused. I think I have German chamomile in my garden, but for some reason, I just can't seem to remember which one is which.
From what I've read, I guess one is a perennial and one is an annual, but the annual reseeds itself.
It does.
But I really would prefer like a personal recommendation.
Yes, yes, and that's what I have is the perennial one, the one that reseeds itself. And I don't know my alphabet here, so I'm going through the book here. Well, I'm not finding it in my book. I'll have to go to the other one. Let me jot that down, and I will email you with a response. I'm sorry, I cannot tell you off the top of my head which is German. I think it's German, but I could be wrong.
But you
and
like
they kind of disappear in the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have been asking some really good questions. I thought you'd maybe throw a couple softballs out, but no, they've all been very research intensive. So very good questions.
Yeah.
And I will just throw a plug in. I'm so grateful to Carol specifically in her work life as a medical professional is really helpful. But if you guys have any questions about the health benefits, definitely consult with your doctor. And if you want any recipes or anything specifically like that, we just ask that you get in touch with either our family consumer science agent, or we also have a great FNEP and SNAP-Ed program if you qualify for those, that have a lot of really wonderful recipes just to kind of expand on everything we've been talking about today. I'm so excited to hear you guys are excited to use herbs and, you know, benefit from all those great health things that Carol was talking about.
Well, Carol, I loved your presentation, and I'm ready to go plant some more herbs out by my kitchen door now.
Wonderful.
You inspired me.
Wonderful. Is that a picture in the background of your herb wheel?
No, but you know, I'm thinking about doing one. It's pretty nice, huh?
It is lovely. There are several ways to do those. I didn't really talk about them in the talk, but herb wheels are a very old-fashioned way. They've been around for many years. The Europeans in the Victorian age loved those kinds of things because of their formal presentation, and would use rosemary as a hedge to create some of their beautiful sculptures even. So herbs have been around for use like that. And there are also some spirals, herb spirals, that I would love to build one of those. We've talked about putting one of those in at Ward Mead, if we can ever get back in there and dig, where you layer up high and then build a circular stone type thing and put your plants in it. So look up herb spirals and you'll see some really interesting things, as well as herb wheels for ways to do some beautiful scenery with your herbs.
I was just going to say that this is where the video will be posted later below the vegetable gardening in small spaces. That was the link I threw in the chat box, and then also the Kansas Garden Guide will be right there. So I just wanted to throw that up before everybody logged off.
Ariel, this is Reggie. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little far away. Is there any way you can get closer to your mic?
Hold on. Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. To assist with the question that you were asked about the chamomile, I know that the Roman chamomile is we used to have to order the Roman chamomile oil for some skin preparations that we make, and it's a lot stronger.
Okay.
So if that would help with the question that you had about the personal preference, just note that the Roman chamomile, which would be the annual here because it's in it's grown in a warmer climate in Italy, would be a lot stronger than the German chamomile.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
That's
Yes, ma'am.
awesome.
I can't hear her.
And before, I hope a couple more of you have questions, but I will be following this up right away with a link. It's just a 2-minute post-webinar evaluation. We hope that you give us really honest feedback so that it helps us improve. I got a kind of a low response on the last one. This is really important to show our stakeholders that these webinars make a difference. So if we don't get good responses, it makes it harder to convince my boss that I should keep doing this. So please just take 2 minutes. I'll send that out as soon as we're done here, and you can go ahead and just fill it out really quickly and submit it. That would be very helpful to us. Any other questions?
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah, great, Calista.
About freezing herbs. When you chop them up and freeze them, I've tried like making paste out of them, and the flavor didn't save very well. So is it better to coarsely chop?
Yeah, they don't have to be too finely chopped. You know, and some will do better than others. You know, some will lose their flavor. Some herbs lose their flavor more with freezing. You just kind of have to experiment around and see what, you know, you like the best. I dry a lot of, I dry herbs, and I think the flavor stays in many of them, like lavender, things like that. I have better luck drying than freezing. But like chives, freeze pretty well, and then throw them in soup, kind of like you do peppers. Just chop them up a bit and put them in the ice cube trays, fill a little bit of water and freeze them, and then put them in a baggie so they're not open to the air. That might help you too.
Okay, thanks.
I have a couple of lavender plants that have come back for the last 2 years. I was really surprised, and they're quite getting big. And I did not know I could start, you know, you're saying I can cut those off and use the cuttings to start new plants?
You may be able to, yeah.
Okay, if I can, someone
cut them
asked.
back in the spring by at least a third. At least
Okay.
a third. And if there's some winter kill, you know, obviously dead stuff, cut that out. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But a third and something, you know, maybe a half, just depends, you know, take a good look at your plant because they're out now. I walked around and looked at mine last week, and and they're coming up pretty good now. So you can tell what to cut back pretty easily now.
Yeah, they're starting to get a little green to them. Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, someone asked if anybody had cuttings. If my cuttings get rooted, I will let you know.
There you go. Give it a shot.
And Kathleen and anybody that's not a Master Gardener, a great place to make that exchange. We have a Facebook group called Friends of the Shawnee County Extension Master Gardeners. What an awesome place to exchange some plants, exchange some cuttings.
Okay.
Any other questions before we log off? Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. Already sent you the post survey link, so if you just take 2 minutes to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. And let me know if you want to sign up for any of the rest of the webinars in this series. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks everybody.
Carol.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks. It was good, Carol.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed doing it.